So welcome to the Global Mangrove Alliance webinar on science of community engagement in mangrove conservation. And I'm Dr. Chris Brown, the Global Wetlands Project. And so thanks so much for joining the webinar today. We're going to have three panelists discussing community engagement in mangrove conservation. And they'll be giving some short presentations about their own work and experience in this area. And then we'll go to a bit of a Q&A so people can ask questions. Now, particularly as we're talking about communities today as well, and in Australia, it is traditional to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we work and acknowledge the Indigenous people. So I'd like to pay my respects to Indigenous peoples for all over the world for where people are working and acknowledge my local Indigenous people, the Palawa. So today our panelists will have Dr. Frida Sidik from the National Research and Innovation Agency in Indonesia, Dr. Ben Brown, who's a researcher and co-founder and chief technical advisor for the Blue Forests, and Dr. Valerie Hagger, who's a research fellow and ecologist at the University of Queensland. And as I said, we'll have three short presentations and then Q&A. The webinar is being recorded, so feel free to share it on to other people afterwards. It will be posted onto YouTube. If you have questions during the webinar, just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen there, and you'll see a Q&A panel, and you can leave questions in the Q&A, and then we'll answer those at the end of the three talks. So Dr. Sidik is speaking first, so I'll hand over to her when she's ready. And welcome Ben as well. So over to you, Frida. And hi, Ben. We'll have you after Frida, now you've joined us.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. So let me share our screen first. Okay. All right. So good morning, afternoon.
It's working well.
Yeah, good. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, or maybe evening, everyone. Thank you for having me in this webinar. My name is Frida Sidik from Indonesia. I'm a mangrove ecologist working at the National Research and Innovation Agency in Indonesia. So my talk today will be about the community participation in mangrove conservation in our site in Bali. So I will present some features of the study site, and we'll discuss about some studies on community-based mangrove management that exists in the study site. So I start with the history of the site. So our site in Budang village, as you can see in these pictures, located in the Jembrana district, western part of Bali. So between 1990 to 2000, mangrove forests were massively converted into aquaculture ponds. But then since early 20s, Budang mangrove has been recovered, and it is showed by an increase of area of mangrove. For example, in 2016, we have about 77.6 hectare and it increased up to the about 113 hectare in 2021, while the area of aquaculture and agriculture lands is decreasing. So it appears that people's understanding of the need to preserve mangrove for the future generation is linked to the recovery. So in this site, mangrove not only play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of coastal environment, but it also provides habitats for many species that brings economic value for the community. For example, the silver fisheries in the restored mangrove, you can see in this picture, can produce fish, crabs, and other seafood. In addition to seafood, some mangrove species also produce edible parts. So we can see here that leaves and fruits are used to make crackers, tea, or maybe juice, and other food items. So these mangrove products are not only nutritionally rich, but they are also economically viable to initiate a small-scale industry for Budong community. Mangrove are also potential for natural dyes. You can see here that we can use the mangrove for the fabric dyes for batik. So we can see here that a diverse range of mangrove products has created sources of income from the participant, and also empower women, increase the profit of fisheries, and generate tourism. The potential of mangrove plants as a source of many products has raised public awareness in this site to preserve mangrove forests ecosystem through sustainable use of non-timber product. So community appear to value environmental services or non-consumptive use, such as ecotourism, and the direct economic returns from mangrove products. Community participation is crucial in the preservation of mangrove ecosystem. So community participation is considered an effective measure to protect the eco-environment and to protect people's livelihoods in the protected area. So in order to assess the level of participation, community participation in this field, a qualitative descriptive analysis was conducted, focusing on 4 stages of community engagement in mangrove management, which are planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So from the analysis, the results show that significant community awareness and involvement have been developed in this village for mangrove Frida, giving the high score for all stages. So the finding shows that the importance of community participation in conservation. So as part of this process, community participation is an important factor in livelihood and also to improve the environment condition. So here I highlight 4 key points of community participation, which are knowledge, public awareness, engagement, and leadership. So in this assessment, we found that strong community participation is supported by community level leadership, or we call mangrove champion. They are usually the residents with high level of place attachment who are more likely to engage in pro-environmental behavior than individuals with lower place attachment level. So we also have the analysis to develop the strategies for increasing the participation of coastal communities in this conservation area. We identify the strength, weakness that originate from the community, as well as the opportunities and challenges that come from the external factors. Based on this SWOT analysis, various strategies were identified. So the first, the strategy, the strength opportunity strategy, utilize the strength to take benefit evidence of existing opportunities. From these figures, we can see that the community include, we can also that the strength of the community include having a preserved mangrove forest with the diverse range of mangrove species, community participation, local wisdom, or we call it awik in Bali, and strong and committed community level leadership. Other good things come from opportunities. We are good access to the site and the trend of mangrove as a tourism destination in Indonesia. So the positive conditions should be continued by some strategies, such as carry out effective mangrove conservation and restoration program. We also have to provide facilities to support this program and enhance the community participation within this site. From this SWOT table, it is also evident that the weakness in the community include the lack of financial support from the local government due to their low commitment of mangrove program. There is no clear regulation to preserve mangrove, and the community has limited skill to manage a mangrove forest. On the other hand, the other issue are also flooding. Also the negative impact of human activities such as pollution and waste, and also the illegal logging by the external. For the strategy for the weakness and opportunity strategies, focus to leverage opportunities to address the weakness, such as we need to establish the master plan to design the site as a sustainable community-based mangrove management, provide training for the communities, and also to build the economic empowerment for the communities, for the small enterprise. And also the strength and the threat strategies aims to leverage the strength to mitigate threats. So we need to collaborate with community to enforce the existing village regulation regarding the mangrove logging by enhancing the education and outreach for the community, and conducting the extensive awareness campaign and education about the importance of the function of the mangrove for the all communities and then the people on that side. And lastly, the weakness and threats strategy, focusing on minimizing the weakness and avoid threats. So we need to encourage the private sectors to involve them, the private sectors, academic, NGO to collaborate with the community to implement the mangrove programs, and provide the special incentive for communities to involve who are involved in the conservation. And also we need to build a committed district level leadership by enhancing the local government commitment to implement mangrove programs. Because here in this site, the local government play a crucial role in enacting regulation that recognize mangrove forests as the green corridors. So we hope that by adopting this strategy, we can have like a improve program, conservation program, and also community participation. And in conclusion, mangroves provide endless benefit for our communities, but in fact, the economic returns from mangrove forests are still marginal. So we still need research to improve the current limited contribution of mangrove to the livelihood. So this is also required research to create a coordinated and effective mangrove governance approach. So based on the findings, there are some research that we can propose. For example, we need to any support in order to make the master plan, and then the market-based mangrove production. So the research could be something like to address how to establish the effective mangrove governance and implement mangrove community-based economic empowerment. And also we need some research. We need also some research focusing on the value-added processing of the coastal and marine resources, ensuring the sustainable utilization without causing any harms. And then, for example, like development of fisheries, it can provide economic income for the community. So we need also the assessment of cost benefit and market access for supporting this effort. And lastly, as you know, that blue carbon now become one of the good option for involving people participation in this program. So we hope that many research can support to find alternative financing for mangrove conservation to the blue carbon. So that's all for me. So I hope that you can enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Frida, your presentation. So just reminding people, if you have questions, just hover your mouse down the bottom of the screen and you'll see some buttons pop up. You can click Q&A and type your question there. Ben, over to you next. And I assume you have slides. So where you set up, I was just going to ask Frida, what sort of mangroves go into that tea? The interesting looking leaves.
That's the acanthus. This is the pioneer. So it's like shrubs.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I'll have to come and try it sometime.
Yeah, sure. I would love to share to anyone.
Yeah. Okay, over to Dr. Ben Brown. Thank you, Ben.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
everything's working well. And you see your slides too.
Great. I just learned today that mangrove coffee is being developed in NTT and part of Indonesia too, from a legume that grows in the mangrove associates. So we can have tea and coffee now, all made of mangroves. All right, so thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to Global Mangrove Alliance. My brief, I think I have 8 slides today. I'm going to present the NGO that I co-founded, Blue Forest, how we engaged indigenous people in Papua, Indonesian Papua, around conservation using resilience theory. I'm currently working with Blue Forest, but also I'm based at the Charles Darwin University and Australian Institute of Marine Science. Before I begin, it's common practice here in Darwin, where I sit, to acknowledge country. So I begin today by acknowledging the Larrakia people, known as the saltwater people, who are the traditional owners of the land where I live and work. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the Chamorro people, sometimes known as the Mimikawe, saltwater people also, as well as the Asmat, who are traditional owners of the land and sea country where the work in this presentation took place. Here's a map of the area I'm talking about. It's in Indonesian Papua, so the western side of the island where Papua New Guinea is on the east. And here we're on the southern coast of Mimika and Asmat districts, which are about 450,000 contiguous hectares of mangroves, very high productivity mangroves, very diverse, plus about 1.5 million hectares of lowland swamp forest behind it. Very productive landscape. We worked in the mid-2010s with US aid on 2 projects, IFAX and Lestari, and the second project, Lestari, had resilience as an approach, and I'm going to describe how we use that approach to develop some interesting community-based conservation, etc. outcomes. We worked in 10 villages. This map's all in Indonesian, I understand, but the green dots are the villages we worked in Mimika district and Asmat district on the right. And that colorful middle area is a map of the Lawrence National Park. So this project took place in a landscape we call the Lawrence Lowlands, and 2 of the villages were located in Lawrence National Park, which is Indonesia's largest national park. Resilience, it's jargony, it's got deep meaning and usefulness, but it's a little difficult to collaborate with grassroots communities around resilience until we have a common understanding of resilience. So our team took this workbook from the Resilience Alliance on how to assess resilience in social ecological systems and translated it first into Indonesian, and then started to go about adapting it so we could use it in engaging communities. I'm going to focus on just a brief aspect of resilience right now called the adaptive cycle, which follows, it describes a cycle of change in ecosystems, ecological systems first. change from a growth phase in the upper left here, where things are growing, to a conservation phase, to maybe a release phase and reorganization. These photos are mangroves in Mimika district in the Aikwa Delta. And in one shot, you could see all of these phases. You could see the mangroves growing, some of them pioneering this area on top of saltwater tolerant grass. You could see older growth forests in a conservation phase. And close to the coast, you could see an erosional area, which was natural erosion in balance with sedimentation in other areas, where the mangroves were just too inundated. There's too much water because the sea levels, in essence, rose in this area. And so mangroves can't tolerate that inundation and died, certain species. But then they're replaced on the left by reorganization. The species that are around will find suitable substrates and start to grow. And the community understood this cycle of growth, conservation, release, and reorganization. And then we tried to apply that not just to their ecosystems, but to their social and economic systems. On the left is our tool in Indonesian of how we facilitate that. It's all in Bahasa Indonesia, though. On the right are the results in the 10 villages. And I'll just briefly talk about this table. So you have they assess, after they understand for a while the different phases of the adaptive cycle, they assess their community, their ecosystem, their social system, and their economic system, and what phase it might be in, to help inform strategies and activities related to conservation, sustainable development, and maybe restoration. And so here I'll focus in only on the green on one village, Yepum. They identified their village as undergoing a reorganization economically. And in terms of social and ecological systems, there's conservation, a big, well-maintained forest and very traditional management. And so their strategy going forward was twofold: sustainable development based on existing resources, and to maintenance of social and ecological states. And when they were focusing in on developing existing resources, they found that they had a lowland swamp forest behind the mangroves that was protecting a lot of fresh water in that system. And their village is nearby to Agats, the capital of Asmat district. And they decided to, a lot of people use their fresh water for livelihoods from other places. So they decided to develop a local payment for ecosystem services, protecting that forest with a patrol and some other regulations, so that other villages would pay for that and continue to be able to use their fresh water. Here's just two quick photos of people in the region planning and going out and measuring, monitoring mangroves and such. And this is my final slide. This is how this resilience assessment fits into our entire conservation and sustainable use scheme in that project, which we captured in this manual called Pengelolaan Kampung Lestari, or Conservation Village Management. And I'll only highlight a few in the planning. There's 3 modules in this book that gives good guidance of how to facilitate different activities. And so the resilience assessment you see is up in the planning area phase right early on. Engagement in informal village and district sustainable development planning and budgeting meetings. So communities that are already working with us, we work with them to engage in their village's own planning processes, which maybe they didn't always participate in, or only village elite participated in. So we practice planning meetings and identify key advocacy messages, and then they present that in their meetings. Social forestry is also a big part of this. So collaborating with Indonesian government around social forestry. These are indigenous communities, so they have their own strong rights to their forest tenure and forest management. There's also the development of village enterprise, in this case with a government program called Boomcam, which is develops village level enterprise. At the end, monitoring and evaluation, we have segments on how to develop joint forest patrol, collaborative forest patrol, leading towards monitoring and evaluation, and eventually informing adaptive management. Happy to share. This document's only in Indonesian. It's quite a pretty document. It's very useful. We still use it. And I'm happy to share at any time. Thanks for your attention and time. Good day.
Thank you, Ben. We're over to Valerie now. And maybe you could share the link for the document. Is it online, the document, or people just email you for the...
Good question. I'll check to see if there's a link online. Otherwise, I can send the document.
Yep. Can I put your slides up, Valerie?
Yeah, I will share my screen.
No, certainly nice images, Ben. And actually, Frida, too, if any of the reference material you want to share, I noticed you had a few references in your... Feel free to put links in the chat and then people can access them straight away. That's working, Valerie. So over to you.
How's that? Yeah, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. From Brisbane. I'm calling from the University of Queensland in Australia. And I was going to talk to you today about a couple of projects or research projects that I've been working on around community and Indigenous-based management of mangrove forests. And just was going to keep this fairly brief so we've got time for discussion afterwards. There we go. So first, also wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and their ancestors and their descendants, and just the significant contributions they have to Australia and the society, and acknowledge the people who I'm calling from today, which is the Yagara and Turrbal people. So this is a project I've been doing, which is funded by AXA Research Fund, and it's also been endorsed as a UN Ocean Decade Action by UNESCO. And the aim is really, so in terrestrial forests, we have community management of forests, which we usually term community forestry. And it's a concept that's used if communities have responsibility over the resources, this being the forests, and they have access to those resources, then they're going to manage them more sustainably. And it's been shown to both reduce forest loss and reduce poverty in drylands. But in mangroves, it's not an emerging practice, but it's just less well studied. And so I wanted to investigate how community or Indigenous-based management can improve the conservation and restoration of mangroves globally, because there are different models of community or Indigenous-based management given land tenure and the approach to do the management. So, and also like the existing threats and issues that those communities experience. So really kind of wanted to look at it, particularly on the mangrove perspective, to identify factors that influence the success of community-based mangrove management. And then from that information, hoping to develop some design principles that can aid for people wanting to do community-based mangrove management programs. And then with collaborators, we're also looking at regional case studies in Australia, Madagascar, Kenya, and Myanmar. So what are the benefits of community-based or Indigenous-based mangrove, forest management, I should initially say. So I said initially it can reduce forest loss and poverty, and predictors of positive outcomes in dryland forests have been things such as biophysical conditions, the communities having de facto tenure rights, what the national context, like the socioeconomic context is, what are the characteristics of the user group, and then also what are the actual types of interventions that have been undertaken. And in a global study I did recently, I actually found that countries with more community forestry case studies had a positive impact on mangrove cover, which led me to undertake this research project. And there are regional studies which have looked at communities-based mangrove management and what influences the success of those programs regionally. And they've found that things like high resource needs and scarcity of the resource, autonomous decision-making, communities with high social capital, if they have well-defined forests, and if they have well-defined user groups, if they have good monitoring, and if they have effective leadership, and if they have assistance from external organizations, these lead to good outcomes for mangrove conservation. But there are other factors that influence the success of community-based management, and that's things like governance systems and land tenure, the Indigenous rights, gender equity, poverty, and also, you know, considering what the existing threats are is important as well. So I'm still undertaking this study, but I just wanted to give you a few initial results. So I've undertaken a meta-analysis of published case studies globally, and there are over 100 papers, and it distilled down to 92 case studies from 30 mangrove holding nations, which represents about 20%, 27% of the countries globally that hold mangroves. And most of the studies you can see in that graph there are from Vietnam and Philippines, Thailand, Mexico, Indonesia, and Brazil. And then from those papers, I've been able to gather data on, so given the hypotheses about what I think is going to influence the success of the management of the mangrove forest, I've been able to collect data on things like the biophysical factors, what are the characteristics of the user group, or the local or the Indigenous community, what are the institutional and economic factors, what are the intervention factors, like what was the actual, you know, co-management type or approach, what they did, how they did it, what the governance is, all these sorts of things. And I won't go through them in detail because it's just a lot. It's taken me quite a long time to analyze all these papers. And then I'm looking at what are the influence of these factors on reported outcomes. So these are the outcomes that have been reported in the paper, whether this is like environmental outcomes, whether it's had a positive or a negative impact on the environment or the biodiversity, but also whether it's had a positive or negative impact on the socioeconomic context. So this is like whether there's been a positive impact to people's for their income, or whether there's just been sustenance for their livelihoods. But also what I'm hoping to do is, because I have location information for all these case studies, is also to try and use some remote sensing to look to see if there's been like a decrease or increase in, say, mangrove condition in the region. And so what is the community management approach that is being used in these projects? Well, there's different types of approaches to community-based management. So there's co-management, which is more like an equitable sharing of responsibility between government and local user groups. And there's also community management, where, you know, the responsibility is largely the communities. They usually, you know, they own the land, or they have the responsibility to make all the decisions and monitor it and enforce that. There's also Indigenous management, and then there's participatory management, which is like, you know, participatory forest management or joint forest management, where the communities don't have as much responsibility and it's more run by the state, but they're given some responsibility for like monitoring and enforcing. So, I mean, overwhelmingly, most of the projects were a co-management approach, and there were very few projects which were actually Indigenous management, but actually quite a few were community management as well. But surprisingly, I found, like, when I looked at to see what is the resources being managed, because I mean, I guess we quite often term this as community forestry, but in mangroves, well, overwhelmingly, most of the projects are actually done for fisheries management. It's not for forest management. So they might be managing the mangroves, but it's to manage the mangroves and the associated ecosystems and the marine environment for like a crab or a shellfish fishery. And so I guess half of the papers are for fisheries management and the other half are for forest management. And a lot of them are for both reasons as well. And then what are the tenure rights? Because understanding what, you know, the community's rights are to the property, both formally or informally, to occupy that land is important to understand, like whether, you know, they have permanence to undertake community forestry in the long term. And what we found is that actually a lot of the projects are still state owned. So they're operating under this co-management approach where the land is still owned by the state, but they're given some sort of permit or agreement or concession to take the resources. But a lot of them still have customary rights. So they're recognizing that. and giving them, you know, responsibility and decision-making given those customary rights. And then this tenure is going to be related to sort of the bundle of rights that they'll be able to have, you know, going from like whether they can just access the property, whether they can access and then also withdraw resources, whether they have decision-making over how they manage it, or whether they're also allowed to exclude other people from going in there, whether they've got rights for alienation. So this is whether they can, like, you know, give the property rights to someone else, and whether they also have responsibility for monitoring and in particular like enforcing where there may have been people who are not following the rules, whether they're actually enforcing that or not. So that's all I really wanted to say about the global project, and it's still very much I'm undertaking the analysis, but hoping to present these results at a conference later in the year. But also I've been involved quite a lot in helping land managers understand what their opportunities are for coastal wetland restoration for blue carbon in Australia. So this is reinstatement of tidal flows to allow carbon sequestration and avoided emissions, which they can register with the government to earn carbon credits. And I guess the main thing I wanted to say from this is that through our sort of comparison of case studies across different regions of Australia, is that it's just really important to engage with the Indigenous people at the outset of your research project or when you're planning a project, because, you know, they have, you know, values that need to be incorporated within the project. And in order to get them in, you know, they are interested in being involved in restoration projects for blue carbon, but their opportunities to be involved are quite limited because a lot of the land in Australia is freehold private land. So you really need to have a look to see where there may be opportunities for the Indigenous people to either partner with land holders, either where there's like leasehold land or crown land, or where there's Indigenous freehold or like native title, or areas where there's opportunities for them to lead the projects as well, and to be incentivized from the carbon credits. So we've been doing this in the Gurrigan country, which is in North Queensland, Australia. And there's 6 clans: the Ngawagi, the Warragame, the Banjin, the Girame, the Gulne, and the Juru, who manage an area under a traditional use of marine resources agreement, which is called a tumra. And they manage this area by undertaking monitoring of seagrass meadows and dugongs and turtles, and they give permits for people to hunt dugongs and turtles in this Great Barrier Reef area, where it's usually not permitted to hunt these native species. So we're looking to see what are the blue carbon stocks in this tumra area, and where are there opportunities for them to undertake restoration. And we identified over 12,000 hectares of potential restorable areas, but actually there's only about 500 hectares of that, which there's opportunities for those projects to be undertaken by the Gurrigan traditional owners, either in partnership with the existing landholders or on like an Indigenous land use agreement or on native title. So then we're hoping now to present these findings back to them and work with the funder, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, to see how we can develop a blue carbon restoration project with them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. That's great. I got into land tenure a bit there, so I'm interested to hear this first question from everyone, but we can start with you, Valerie. There was a question about land tenure needs to be resolved before mangrove restoration projects can be implemented. Who will onboard Indigenous communities for change? Or, and I guess, any comments around how do you work through land tenure issues with communities?
Well, I don't. So what's the question about how we work through land tenure issues? Well, I suppose, I mean, it's difficult. So if the land tenure is freehold, which is not Indigenous freehold, but like private freehold land, well, then there's not really an opportunity unless the landowner is willing to that would have to be that would have to be dealt with contractually. So if the landowner was willing to relinquish their carbon rights to the Indigenous community for them to lead the carbon project, they could, but it would have to be under contract, or they would have to like lease the land to them, something like that. That's why
I guess
really looking for freehold land. We're more looking for land which has got potential for native title, so like crown land, if it's like leasehold land, or if it's, you know, reserve land or crown land. So if it's state owned or Commonwealth owned, there is potential for that land to become native title and for the traditional owners to claim carbon rights on it. So they're more, we're sort of working within the bounds of the land tenure.
The existing land tenure, yeah. And just for Ben and Frida to think about the answer there as well. And I think the question's also a bit about, it's complex, like how do you communicate land tenure issues to communities as well? Was it, you know, adding a layer of legal complexity there? Did you have comments on that, Ben?
Yeah, maybe too much. So how to simplify it? Tenure is one of the key bottlenecks inhibiting restoration in Indonesia for sure. I co-authored a paper, a brief note on that with Frida and Valerie's supervisor, Kath Lovelock, just on that exact thing. In practice, in Indonesia, how to say it simply, mangroves exist in state forest. About 2/3 of Indonesia's mangroves are in state forest, and 1/3 are in what are called alternate use lands, which are under jurisdiction of subnational government. And can be privately owned in that third of an area. So before any kind of mangrove initiative, restoration or conservation or sustainable use, in this assessment phase or even pre-assessment, we just do a lot of mapping, community-based mapping and GIS mapping, et cetera, to kind of understand how people view tenure in that certain area. And if there's conflict, a lot of social interviews. Is there conflict? How has the land been used in the past and present? And are there plans dictating how this land can be used in the future, et cetera? And it's always a mix of public ownership or private ownership or informal or formal ownership. And so once you find that out in stakeholder group, in community discussions or bigger at higher levels of governance, multi-stakeholder groups talking through those issues, to see where restoration opportunity truly is, green, and kind of map it in a green, yellow, red sort of way. And then our principle as Blue Forests, our NGO, and also on this government project, that the National Mangrove Program I work on in Indonesia, has a principle of do no harm. So there's not going to be any eviction of people on the wrong land to allow restoration or whatever. You would rather not do it than cause any, exacerbate any conflict. And we also employ certified forest conflict resolution people to help in these meetings, which are sensitive, et cetera. But the bottom line is, don't force any restoration or conservation or whatever if there's potential for conflict, but to map where the opportunities are. And if it's green, go ahead. If it's yellow, invest to resolve that. And if it's red, maybe after green and yellow succeed, some of the red areas will be interested in restoration or conservation or whatever you're proposing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sounds like you've developed a pretty comprehensive approach to deal with land tenure issues. Frida, did you have comments as well on land tenure?
Yeah, I think I agree with Ben that the Indonesia land tenure is very complicated. So once we have such as like the mangrove program or rehabilitation program, any conservation, anything like the mangrove program, we have to make sure that there's a clear of the land tenure issue in the land. So even though like the land is owned by the government, we still have many issues. So I think we need some approach, especially for the community, how we can settle the issue. And then, of course, that we have to give like alternative economic value of the mangrove, so we can have we can settle the issue for the land tenure issue.
I'm going to follow up on that one because there's another question about the economic opportunities. And the question comes from India, where cutting or harvesting any part of mangroves is prohibited. So do you have comments on how you do incentivize community participation if, you can't be making the mangrove coffee or mangrove tea or doing those other types of activities to make small businesses?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, India is not alone in the case studies that I've looked at. There's many countries that have a ban on mangrove cutting. They do in Brazil, they also in Bangladesh. So the Sundarbans mangrove forest, they're not allowed to extract timber or cut down mangrove wood, but the communities rely on the Sundarbans mangrove forest for like non-timber forest products, for like honey collecting, the fisheries. They're allowed to extract, I think, fallen timber for fuel wood. So there are other resources that can be used from mangroves, in particular fisheries, so crabs and shellfish, fish, but those non-timber forest products. But I think in some countries it's not enforced, and that's quite often, like if there is a ban on mangrove cutting, then the issues with the actual community-based management is that people from outside the community are still going in and cutting down some mangrove trees and taking timber. So you need to, as part of the strategy, provide, I guess, training on sustainable harvesting, but also have some alternative energy sources. Like, why are they cutting down the wood? Is it for fuel wood? Because is it part of the processing of the crab meat, or is it for lime production? And then you need to provide alternative energy sources like solar power, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Valerie. And Frida, did you have comments on that as well from your experience with working with the small businesses and incentives? Oh, you're muted.
I think it's similar condition in Indonesia, like in our side, like the community try to protect the mangrove, but the people from the outside community, they try to extract the mangrove illegally. So that's something that also I already discussed in the presentation, that there are some approach to give the not only to give the incentivize for the people, but we also need like we conduct some like extensive awareness campaign and educational program for the community, and also build sort of like people from community to have like a monitoring group. So they sort of like have the some program how to protect the mangrove, and try to have the regular sort of like sharing, monitoring the site as well, because sometimes they said that the people from the outside community try to cut the mangrove out while maybe there are no people there. So we need more law enforcement as well. Yeah. And then we need also the local government to have like a very strict regulation, because sometimes there are conflicting in regulation about the mangrove. Yeah.
Yeah, it's common is to have that conflicting legislation, isn't it? Because it might be covered under some marine legislation, some land-based legislation. Thank you. I'll start with Ben for the next question. I was going to ask how you go explaining the idea of carbon offsets and blue carbon finance to communities. Is it well received, that idea, or challenging?
Interesting. I guess in Indonesia, so the majority of my work on this is in Indonesia, with one small nascent project here in the territory. I guess I can just talk about both. In Indonesia, voluntary blue carbon is still, from a central government regulatory perspective, risky. It's not, the registrar is not fully developed and operational. There's benefit sharing is not clear. And what Indonesia will allow to contribute to be sold out on the voluntary market versus what it wants to contribute to its NDCs still needs to be determined more. And there's a time period involved with that, like a 40-year time period. So there's still some issues with voluntary blue carbon in Indonesia. All that said, they gave sort of a false warning, like starting pistol last year. And a lot of groups, private groups, have tried to develop voluntary carbon projects all around Indonesia. And that's taking place right now. It's really actually a gray area. So we only have one. We have no active, like registered blue carbon projects in Indonesia. Although we work a lot and we have a lot of things going on, but we are engaged in one with the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund with IUCN and International Partnership for Blue Carbon, one project in Indonesia to test a blue carbon project in Southeast Sulawesi, just starting. In the territory, I won't say too much, except the community is very interested in this area already, in financing the control of invasive ungulates, feral ungulates, so water buffalo and pigs, which are degrading their mangroves and mostly their freshwater swamp behind the mangroves. And they just want to see if blue and blue teal carbon is viable enough and worth it to help them mustering or shooting to kill these invasive animals without, and there's a lot of deliberations at the community level because they still use the pigs and water buffalo for a source of food, but those are displacing local sources of food as well. So it's just a long process of walking on country and discussion and calculations and some capacity building for rangers and other people in the community to understand the picture from their perspective, but also add a little rigorous science onto it so that eventually we decide if we can make a project concept note or not. And so it's all still early days, I would say. All the while, the market for voluntary carbon, forest carbon, seems to be dwindling, right? So anyway.
Oh, thank you for sharing those perspectives. Yeah, it sounds like it's just very challenging, and communicating with communities about carbon would be, it depends on the community, and they will have different issues they'd like to address. Dominic Wodehouse has a comment, I guess, but if anyone wants to finish up with some comments on that, he said, in Thailand, cutting is banned by national law. However, local field office directors sometimes make local deals. If the community worked and patrolled with their government office, then the community were allowed to limit extraction. But that was a legal limbo to do that. So did anyone have comments on those sorts of like local deals that are outside the law that I guess are relying on social capital?
Yeah.
Ben does, but yeah. To go quickly, and then we'll hear from Valerie and Frida before.
In one of our work sites in West Kalimantan, in Kuburaya, there's 3,000 community members involved in illegal logging for charcoal production, and it's not that lucrative. The charcoal, anyway, it's risky and it's illegal. the community want more land. They have social forestry in that area of a vast area, but timber is not allowed. So they've been trying to get an area for legal timber. And the forest concessions, which legally took mangrove timber from that area, have closed down, but also for financial viability reasons. The community is still doing it, but it's risky and it's hard to manage for us because it exposes them when we try to engage with government and develop a compromise or collaborative management. So it's very tricky. And I think Indonesia is moving towards a moratorium on mangrove cutting as well, which places more emphasis again on non-timber forest products, fisheries, values, and ecotourism and blue carbon and all that kind of stuff. But some of those things are slow in developing, and especially like ecotourism comes up a lot. And I would say the risk there is feasibility. And everyone jumps into the idea the government supports ecotourism, but people are reticent to do a feasibility assessment to see if it's worthwhile, right? So again, assessment, like I think a common theme I'm saying today is a lot of time spent in assessment and understanding what to do before you make a decision, and doing it is imperative.
Ben, Frida, do you have comments about working with local communities to come up with agreements?
Yeah, we also have like a similar things like even worse, like mangrove sometimes get involved in like a political issue, like in long time ago in our side that some of the people got punished because of they cleared the mangrove, but we found out like because not because the regulation, but because the owner of the land who cleared the mangrove are like a political, have power with, and then so this is things like I have to highlight that the local government, the committed, and then the strong leadership of the local government is very important. So even though like the national level, we have like enhanced regulation about mangrove, everything. But if the local government doesn't have like a very weak leadership, so that's happened to maybe in Thailand and Indonesia, that they can do anything they like for the mangrove, even though they have clear regulation about mangrove. And then also, this is the thing that we have to highlight about how leadership is important in mangrove management from the community level, district level, and also from national level.
Great, thank you. And Valerie, last words from you, and then we'll sign off.
Oh yeah, I mean that the situation that Dominic mentioned, I mean, it sounds legit. I think, it does open up doors for corruption if, one community is allowed to do it and another community is not. But then it sounds like, if they have, good support from the local government, which is a driver of sort of successful community-based management, and if they're able to work with the government to understand how they monitor taking of any timber and ensure that the harvesting is having minimal impact, then it can be done sustainably. But it's just working out like what can be taken sustainably and having well-defined rules around that and monitoring that.
Great, thank you, Valerie. Well, time's up. So I'd just like to thank all of our presenters for sharing their thoughts today with us and sharing their case studies. It was really interesting. We'll be posting this video to YouTube, so feel free to share it around other people. And feel free to write to me if you have ideas for other webinar panels you'd like to see the Global Mangrove Alliance do. So thanks for joining us today, and see you all next time, everyone.